Be me, Edwin. Just a regular dude trying to get by. I have a decent job in tech, a small circle of good friends, and a life that's generally drama-free. Or, at least, it was. This whole story starts about a year ago, maybe in the fall, when the weather was just starting to turn. I went to a buddy's barbecue, one of those last chance before winter type of deals. That's where I met Rachel. She was smart, really quick-witted, and had this energy about her that was hard to ignore. We got to talking over by the drinks cooler. The conversation was easy, flowed naturally. She talked about her job, her passions, mentioned being a strong feminist, which was fine by me. I believe in equality, treating people right. It didn't seem like a red flag, just a part of who she was. She had this way of looking at you when you talked that made you feel like you were the only person in the yard. We exchanged numbers before I left. I didn't think much of it, but she texted me later that night. So we started dating. The first month or two was pretty much perfect. The honeymoon phase, I guess you'd call it. We went to museums, tried new restaurants, took a weekend trip to a small town a few hours away. It felt like a real partnership. We talked about everything, or so I thought. My best friend Mark met her about a month in. We all went out for drinks. Mark is a pretty straightforward guy, doesn't beat around the bush. Later, when it was just us, he told me she seemed a little intense. He couldn't put his finger on it, just said there was something in the way she analyzed every little thing he said. I brushed it off. He told him he was just not used to someone so passionate and intelligent. I genuinely believed that at the time. I thought her intensity was a good thing. The first weird sign, the first real test, was so small I almost missed it. We were getting ready to go out to dinner one night. She came out of her room wearing a new dress. I told her she looked beautiful, a simple, honest compliment. Her face changed, just a little flicker in her eyes. She asked me why. That was the first thing I noticed. She wondered if I only valued her for her appearance, if my attraction was based on objectification. I was completely blindsided. I tried to explain that it was just a nice thing to say, that of course I valued her for her mind and personality. She then went on a long monologue about the male gaze and how compliments can be a subtle form of control. I didn't even know how to respond. I just stood there, nodding. To keep the peace, I apologized. I said I'd try to be more mindful of how my words might be perceived. She smiled, gave me a kiss, and said she was glad I was willing to learn and grow. The whole incident felt bizarre, like I'd stumbled into a play where I didn't know my lines, but I let it go. I figured she was just very principled about her beliefs. A few weeks later, another test. This one was about money. We were at a nice Italian place for our 3-month anniversary. The bill came. I put my credit card in the little black folder without thinking. It's just what I've always done. She slid the folder back to my side of the table and put her own card in. She told me she was an independent woman and didn't need a man to pay for her. Fair enough, I respected that. I told her I admired her independence. The next time we went out, to a more casual place, I remembered that. When the check arrived, I suggested we split it. Her eyes welled up with tears. I had no idea what was happening. She quietly asked if I didn't see her as someone worth treating. She said a man who truly cares for his partner would want to provide and take care of her. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting. I tried to bring up the last time, how she insisted on paying. She said that was a test of my character. Apparently, I was supposed to insist on paying to show that I was a capable provider, even if she refused. My suggestion to split the bill showed that I didn't really care. I felt like I was in a lose-lose situation. There was no right answer. I ended up paying for the whole meal, plus apologizing for being insensitive. I told Mark about it the next day when we were shooting hoops. He just shook his head. He said it was a classic manipulation tactic. He called it a Schrödinger's test, where the correct answer only reveals itself after you've already chosen the wrong one. He warned me that this kind of behavior doesn't just go away. It gets worse. Again, I defended her. I said she was complex, and our relationship was just finding its footing. Looking back, I was making excuses for her because I wanted the perfect beginning to be real. The next stage of the escalation involved my friends. I had a few of my oldest buddies over for a poker night. It's something we do once every couple of months. Rachel wanted to hang out too. I thought it was cool, a chance for her to get to know my friends better. The night was a disaster. My friends were just being themselves, joking, telling old stories, giving each other a hard time in a friendly way. Rachel sat on the couch, not playing, just watching everyone with this clinical, judgmental expression. She didn't say much, but her silence was deafening. The moment my friends left, it started. She told me my friends were a clear example of toxic masculinity. She dissected their jokes, claiming they were laced with subtle misogyny. She said the way they competed at poker was a manifestation of primal male aggression. These are guys I've known since I was a kid. One of them is a middle school teacher. Another volunteers at an animal shelter. I tried to defend them, saying she was misinterpreting their dynamic, that it was just how guys are with each other. That was a huge mistake. She told me that saying boys will be boys was a way of excusing harmful behavior. She suggested that I needed to distance myself from their negative influence if I wanted our relationship to be healthy. She was essentially asking me to choose between her and my friends. I didn't give her an answer. I just said I was tired and went to bed. The atmosphere in the apartment was icy for days. I eventually caved and told her I would talk to my friends about being more inclusive in their language. I never actually did, of course, but I said it just to restore the peace. It felt like I was abandoning a piece of myself to placate her. Then came the social media inspection. One evening, we were watching a movie. She was scrolling through her phone. She casually mentioned that she believed couples in a truly committed relationship should have nothing to hide. She said that for the sake of complete transparency, we should share our phone passwords and social media logins. A huge alarm bell went off in my head. I told her I wasn't comfortable with that I believed in privacy, even in a relationship. She turned it around on me immediately. If I had nothing to hide, why was I so protective of my privacy? My resistance, she claimed, was a sign of a guilty conscience. We argued for hours. She cried. She accused me of not trusting her. In the end, I was just exhausted. I gave her my passwords. I had nothing to hide, so I figured it would prove my loyalty and the issue would be dropped. I was so naive. Giving her the passwords wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new kind of hell. She started conducting what I can only describe as digital archaeology. She would dig back years into my social media history. One night, she woke me up at 2 a.m., holding her phone in my face with a screenshot. It was a photo I had liked on Instagram 4 years ago, a picture of a female friend from college who was on vacation. She demanded to know who this woman was, what my relationship with her was, and why I felt the need to like a picture of her in a bikini. I tried to explain that it was an old friend from years before I even met her, and a like is just a meaningless tap on a screen. She didn't buy it. She said it was a betrayal, that my past actions reflected my present character. This became a regular occurrence. Every few days she'd find some new infraction from my past. A comment on a friend's photo, a female colleague I was following, an ex-girlfriend from a decade ago that I had forgotten to unfriend on Facebook. Each one was presented as fresh evidence of my untrustworthiness. The irony was that her own social media activity was completely different. She was constantly messaging other guys, leaving flirty comments on their posts. When I calmly pointed this out one day, showing her the obvious double standard, she exploded. She said I was insecure and controlling. She claimed her interactions were harmless, while mine were predatory because of the inherent power imbalance in the patriarchy. My brain couldn't even process that logic. It was like arguing with a brick wall. It was around this time that something inside me started to change. I stopped fighting back. I stopped defending myself. When she would confront me with some new evidence of my toxicity, I would just agree with her. I'd say, "You're right, I'm sorry." It was easier than the endless circular arguments that went nowhere. She saw this as a victory. She thought she was finally training me. She told me once during a calm moment that she was proud of the progress I was making in unlearning my toxic behaviors. She actually thought she was helping me. In reality, I was just emotionally checking out. I was building a wall inside myself, brick by brick. The person she was training wasn't me anymore. It was a hollow version of me, an empty shell designed to minimize conflict. The real me was getting buried deeper and deeper. My friends noticed the change. Mark pulled me aside one day. He said I looked like a ghost. He said I never smiled anymore. He told me, "Whatever she's doing to you, it's not worth it. No one is worth losing yourself over." I just nodded and told him I was fine, just tired from work. I was too far in. I felt like I couldn't even see a way out anymore. Her tests started bleeding into every aspect of my life. My hobbies were scrutinized. The video games I played were deemed problematic for their portrayal of women. The movies I liked were analyzed for their patriarchal themes. My taste in music was criticized for not being conscious enough. It felt like my entire personality was being audited and found wanting. She tried to dictate what I wore, suggesting my old band t-shirts were juvenile and that I should dress more like a modern, enlightened man. She went through my bookshelf and made a pile of books she considered written from a place of unexamined male privilege. I came home one day and the pile was gone. She had donated them. I didn't even have the energy to get angry. I just felt empty. I was living in a constant state of low-grade anxiety, always waiting for the next test, the next accusation. I walked on eggshells in my own home. Every word I said was rehearsed in my head first to make sure it couldn't be misinterpreted. The weirdest part is that on the surface, to outsiders, we probably looked like a great couple. When we were with her friends, she would praise me for being so receptive to feedback and willing to do the work. Her friends, who were all just like her, would nod in agreement and look at me with a mixture of pity and approval. I was their little project, the tamed man. It was humiliating. The affection and intimacy in our relationship became entirely conditional. If I had a good week, where I passed all her unspoken tests and didn't trigger any of her ideological tripwires, she would be warm and loving. But if I had a bad week, where I said the wrong thing or forgot to perform some small act of penance for the crime of being male, she would be cold and distant. There was no physical intimacy, no kind words, just a punishing silence. It was a tool she used to control my behavior, and for a long time, it worked. I found myself constantly seeking her approval, trying to get back to the good version of our relationship. I was so focused on surviving the day-to-day that I didn't realize I had completely lost sight of who I was. I was a stranger to myself. My own life felt like it belonged to someone else. I was just going through the motions, a passenger in a car driving off a cliff in slow motion. And the whole time, she was in the driver's seat, smiling, convinced she was steering us toward a better place. Little did she know, we were heading straight for the end of the road, and the final test was just around the corner. The turning point wasn't a big explosion, but a quiet little click inside my head. It happened a few weeks before the end. I got a call from my boss. He told me I was being promoted to a senior project lead. It was a big deal, something I'd been working towards for years. Normally, I would have been ecstatic. I would have called Mark, called my parents, and wanted to celebrate. But my first thought was, how is Rachel going to react to this? I actually felt a wave of dread. I started pre-planning the conversation in my head, trying to figure out how to frame my success in a way that wouldn't be perceived as a threat or an example of male privilege. That's when it clicked. My own success, my own personal achievement, had become a source of anxiety because of her. I had stopped thinking about my own happiness and was only thinking about managing her reactions. The wall I had built inside myself didn't feel like a defense anymore. It felt like a prison. When I told her the news that evening, I did it carefully. I downplayed the title, focused on the collaborative nature of the team, and made sure to mention a female colleague who had also been promoted recently. Rachel's reaction was lukewarm at best. She gave me a tight, forced smile. She said she hoped this new position of power wouldn't go to my head. She told me it was a crucial opportunity for me to be an ally and challenge the boys' club mentality from within. There was no congratulations. No, I'm so proud of you. My achievement was immediately reframed as a new set of responsibilities and potential moral failings I needed to be wary of. It was just another test, but this time, something was different. Her words didn't hurt. They didn't make me anxious. They just bounced off me. The hollow part of me went through the motions, nodding and agreeing. Yes, you're right. I'll be mindful of that. But the real me, buried deep inside, had finally woken up. And it was done. Completely and utterly done. I didn't let it show. I continued to play the part of the tame man. I knew that any sudden change in my behavior would be met with a massive emotional onslaught, and I just didn't have the energy for that fight. I needed to wait for the right moment. I wasn't planning anything dramatic. I just knew I couldn't live like this anymore. The final scene was set by my parents. They were thrilled about my promotion and insisted on hosting a small dinner to celebrate. It was just going to be them, my sister, Mark, and me. My mom asked if I was bringing Rachel. For a split second, I thought about saying no, making up an excuse. But I knew that would create a separate drama I didn't want to deal with, so I said yes. I told myself it would be the last time, the last hurdle. The night of the dinner arrived. I drove us over to my parents' house. The car ride was tense. Rachel was giving me a quiz on how I was going to handle any problematic comments from my family. She was particularly concerned about my dad, who is a pretty traditional old-school guy. She was arming me with talking points and counter-arguments for conversations that hadn't even happened. I just kept my eyes on the road and said, "Okay, I understand, and I'll remember that." We got to my parents' house. The evening started off well enough. My family was warm and welcoming, just like they always are. They made an effort to include Rachel in the conversation, asking about her work and her life. Mark was there, and he was polite but distant with her. He knew what was going on, and he was just there for me. We sat down for dinner. The food was great. The conversation was light. My dad, true to form, decided to make a little toast. He raised his glass and started talking about how proud he was of me. He mentioned how I used to spend hours building things with Lego as a kid, how I always worked hard in school. He said, "Son, you've always been a reliable, hard-working man, and you've earned every bit of your success. We're all so proud of you." It was a simple, heartfelt speech from a father to his son. My mom was tearing up a little. My sister was smiling. It was a genuinely touching family moment, and that's when Rachel decided to detonate the bomb. The moment my dad finished, she let out a small, condescending laugh. She looked around the table, a smug smile on her face. "That's a very sweet traditional sentiment," she began, her voice dripping with condescension. "But I hope now that Edwin has more power and money, he doesn't forget the inherent privilege that got him there. It's a fine line between being a hard-working man and just another cog in the patriarchal machine." The silence that fell over the table was instant and absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. My mom's smile vanished. Her face was a mask of disbelief. My sister just stared at her plate, her knuckles white. Mark looked like he was about to physically launch himself across the table. I saw him clench his jaw so hard a muscle twitched in his cheek. My dad just looked confused and hurt. And everyone, every single person at that table, turned to look at me. They were waiting for my reaction, waiting for the explosion, the argument, the defense of my family's honor. This was it, her masterpiece, the ultimate public loyalty test. She wanted me to either join her in criticizing my family, proving my allegiance to her ideology, or argue with her, proving I was still an unenlightened brute who couldn't handle criticism. Another perfect trap. I looked at her. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hurt. I felt nothing at all. It was like looking at a stranger. The emotional connection was completely severed. The final wire had been cut. I held her gaze for a moment. Then I slowly turned my head to look at my dad. I picked up my fork, speared a piece of potato, and put it in my mouth. I chewed, swallowed, and then looked back at Rachel. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Noted," I said. Just that one word. It was quiet, calm, and completely devoid of emotion. Then I turned to my sister. "So, how's that new project at your firm going? You were telling me about the zoning issues." The spell was broken. My sister, catching on immediately, started talking about her work. Mark joined in, asking her questions. We just moved on. We left Rachel sitting there in the crater of her own making. She was stunned. Her mouth was slightly open. This was not in her script. She had pulled the pin on her grand emotional grenade, and it had just fizzled out on the table. Her power came from my reaction, from my engagement in her drama. By giving her nothing, I had rendered her powerless. The rest of the dinner was painfully awkward for her, but fine for the rest of us. We talked, we laughed, we ignored the black hole of negativity sitting at the table. She didn't say another word for the rest of the meal. The car ride home was silent, utterly, completely silent. The air was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. She was waiting for me to break, to start yelling, to give her the fight she craved. I just focused on the road, my hands steady on the steering wheel. I pulled up to her apartment building and put the car in park. She finally turned to me, her eyes blazing with fury. "So that's it? You're not going to say anything? You just let your family disrespect me, and you publicly humiliated me by ignoring what I said." I turned to face her. The calm was still there. "I didn't humiliate you, Rachel," I said, my voice even. "And they didn't disrespect you. You disrespected them. In their own home. You tried to ruin a moment that was important to my family just to prove a point." She scoffed. "A point that you clearly still don't understand. I was testing you. I was seeing if you would stand up for what's right, or if you would just revert to protecting the status quo. I nodded slowly. It was almost sad, really. She still thought she was in the right. You're right, I said. It was a test, the last one. And you failed it miserably, she shouted. You should have supported me. You should have engaged with the substance of what I was saying. No, I said, and the finality in my voice seemed to surprise even me. I've been failing your tests for a year now. I've failed the money test, the friends test, the social media test. Tonight was just the final exam. I took a breath. And since I've failed, there's no reason for us to be together anymore. We're done. Her face went through a rapid-fire series of emotions. First rage, then confusion, then sheer unadulterated shock. What? She whispered. You can't break up with me. This is just a fight. We can talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, I said. You've spent the last year trying to change me into someone I'm not. You don't love me, Rachel. You love the idea of a project you can fix. But I'm not your project. And I'm not broken? Tears started streaming down her face. These weren't the manipulative tears I was used to. This was real panic. But I love you, she cried. Everything I did it for us, to make you a better man, to make our relationship stronger. No, I said, shaking my head. You did it for you. You made our relationship an adversarial game that you had to win. But a relationship isn't a game, and you didn't win. I got out of the car, walked around to her side, and opened her door. A final act of detached politeness. She just sat there, staring at me, her face a mess of tears and confusion. Get out of the car, Rachel. She stumbled out, still looking at me as if I'd grown a second head. I got back in, shut the door, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror, but I could feel her eyes on my car until I turned the corner. I drove to Mark's place. He opened the door, took one look at my face, and just said, "It's over, isn't it?" I nodded. He pulled me into a hug, and for the first time in a year, I felt like I could actually breathe. The next day I had Mark come with me to my old apartment to get my stuff. Her car was there, but she wasn't. I was grateful for that. We packed my things in silence. It didn't take long. On the kitchen counter, she had left a long, rambling letter. I picked it up, read the first line, which was something about how I had misunderstood everything. And then I just tore it in half and dropped it in the trash. I left my key on the counter and walked out the door for the last time. It felt like walking out of a prison into the sunlight. It's been a few months since then. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she's been telling everyone I broke up with her because I was too fragile to handle being challenged by a strong woman. She's framed it as me being the one with the problem. And you know what? I don't care. Let her think what she wants. I'm just happy to have my life back. My friends, my hobbies, my peace of mind. I'm happy to be just Edwin again, a regular dude trying to get by. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like more than enough.